Yo, what is up everybody, Jay the Great here, and welcome back to another Naruto reaction video here today. And today we have a very intriguing topic by the Great Six once again, and as you can tell by the title, this is Proving Madara is a Narcissist. So folks, terms like narcissist and sociopathic are thrown around a lot, despite both these terms being their own psychological diagnosis that a medical professional can deem you if you meet the criteria for such said condition, right? So before we even begin, let's go ahead and define what narcissist is, and let's see what are some of the prerequisites you must meet to be diagnosed as such, right? So I'm on a legitimate medical website, clevelandclinic.org for those wondering. So let's go ahead and see what exactly is a narcissist, right? So a narcissist is a common catchphrase, that's for sure, describing someone who acts self-absorbed or vain. What many don't know is that narcissism, or narcissistic personality disorder, is actually a serious condition. If you have a NPD diagnosis, others may see you as only concerned about your wants and needs, or having a never-ending need for compliments. But inside you may feel insecure, less than, and empty. Having NPD makes it hard to relate to others, or have genuine self-worth. It can affect relationships with your family, friends, and coworkers. How common is narcissistic personality disorder? Experts estimate that up to 5% of people have NPD. Narcissism is one of 10 personality disorders. These disorders can cause people to think, feel, and behave in ways that hurt themselves or others. Signs of personality disorders usually appear in the late teen years and early adulthood. Right, so now some of the symptoms here. What are narcissistic traits, characteristics? Diagnose NPD when you have at least 5 of the following characteristics. Okay. Overinflated sense of self-importance. All right. Constant thoughts about being more successful, powerful, smart, loved, or attractive than others. Feelings of superiority and desire to only associate with high status people. Need for excessive admiration. Sense of entitlement. Willingness to take advantage of others to achieve goals. Lack of understanding and consideration for other people's feelings and needs. Arrogant or snobby behaviors and attitudes. All right. So that's the definition, how common it is, and the various prerequisites you must meet to be considered a narcissist. So another thing I might add from the studies I've done, not to say I'm a professional by any means, is that you got to display extreme amounts of these prerequisites to meet this diagnosis, right? Because every individual, whether a legitimate narcissist or not, can display narcissistic traits, right? But if they're not extreme and they're not consistent and radical enough to be deemed as narcissistic, then you're simply just a normal human being, right? There are individuals that do have self-absorbed and selfish tendencies, but are not necessarily narcissistic. They're not as radical as an actual legitimate narcissist, right? So just because someone is selfish or self-absorbed doesn't necessarily mean they're a blatant narcissist. A lot of people don't seem to understand that, which is why the term narcissist and sociopath and other words are thrown around so much, because they don't understand how to truly meet the criteria of a narcissist, right? Only real professionals, for the most part, know how to diagnose someone as such. So today, we're going to see 6 prove Madara is a narcissist. At least that is what is implied from the title. Going into the video, I don't think Madara is a narcissist. I think he has selfish and self-absorbed tendencies, but I don't think he's radical enough to be considered a narcissist. Maybe 6 will change my mind. A narcissist in Naruto would be someone like Hidan, or someone like Part 1 Madara. That is a narcissistic individual, blatantly. Radical levels of selfishness, radical levels of disregard for other people's safety, happiness, etc. Those, to me, are legitimate narcissists. But either way, I'm very intrigued to see what 6 has to say about this one. But before I begin, any love is greatly appreciated. Hit that like button, turn on bell notifications to stay updated with yours truly. And if you enjoy my mess with the kid, make sure to hit that sub button, because once you do, become part of the family forever. But let's not waste any more time, screen. Let's see what 6 says about this one.
Continuing my series where I take a look at the mental state of certain characters, I'm switching back to Naruto to talk about Madara Uchiha.
Right.
Madara is one of the greatest antagonists of all time. His
Agreed.
goal, while very wild and grandiose, is very believable and seems to be within his grasp, especially when considering how powerful he is.
Agreed.
There are a couple ways to show everyone how believable a goal is for a character in your story to accomplish, and Kishimoto goes for the whole he can brute force his way through everything sort of storytelling. If Naruto came with a rule book as to why certain things can't come to pass, Madara takes that rule book and writes "except for Madara" in crayon right below each rule. The 5 Kage are the strongest
Pretty
ninja
much.
in the world. Well, they are all gonna have to come out to fight this guy. They declare they're going to win. Well, Madara was just holding back to have fun. You lose your Susanoo when you go blind? Not Madara, he'll just use it with no eyes. The 10 tails makes you go insane when you become a Jinchuriki? Not Madara, he's just fine mentally. I'm not going to info dump every example of this because you get the point. Madara makes us think the unaccomplishable can be accomplished simply because of who he is, and he has the personality to back it up and complement this insane power. Madara's entire plan is telling everyone else to f*** off. He knows what's best for the world and he is the savior, with his plan to put everyone in the infinite Tsukuyomi dream. We get a decent amount of content on Madara's entire life, and some of the things he said made me wonder if the guy is a straight up narcissist or not, because sometimes the guy seems like one and in other times maybe not so much. It could be the case that this developed over time, and sitting in solitude for over 60 years with nothing but Zetsu to talk to and his own thoughts, he went slowly deeper and deeper into narcissism to the point where it's almost like a god complex. We'll define narcissism first, then we'll talk about the specific examples as well as going over Madara's upbringing to determine if this is something that developed as part of being someone who loses so many people to the ninja world, or if it's just his character all along. Before we begin, I'd appreciate it if you could leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. These videos are never easy to make and require a great amount of research, so I really would appreciate it. Narcissism. Taking a look at Oxford Language's definition of it, we see 3 different definitions. Which of these can apply to Madara, or can all of them fit the context of his character? Definition number 1 is excessive interest in or admiration of oneself and one's physical appearance. As far as I can remember, Madara has never talked about himself in a way that would lead you to think he's overly proud of his appearance. And if anything, the guy's plan, or at least part of it, is to become gray and scaly, so I guess we can just skip this definition. The psychological definition is selfishness involving a sense of entitlement, a lack of empathy, and a need for admiration, as characterizing a personality type. Madara definitely has a sense of entitlement. Bro thinks he can decide what's best for the entire world and just force it onto people against any wish they may have. He seems to also have a giant lack of empathy. Again, no one wants to be put in this dream, yet he's going to do so anyway. I will say though, I think Madara may have a lot of empathy at one point, but I'll talk about that later.
Alright.
A need for admiration? Not so much. I've never seen Madara wanting to be admired or anything like that. Regardless, I think we can get somewhere with that definition, so we'll go with it. But the last one is a psychoanalysis definition. Self-centered, arising from failure to distinguish the self from external objects, either in very young babies or as a feature of a mental disorder. This one is sort of interesting, so I'll definitely be talking about it as well.
Okay.
Now, that is narcissism, but narcissist has a different definition. That being a person who has an excessive interest in or admiration of themselves. This is just another definition that I want to take a look at while going through Madara's character. But okay, now that we have our outline of narcissism and narcissists, we can start going over Madara's upbringing and whether or not he is or always was a narcissist. Madara was born in the Warring States period, and this was a terrible time to be alive. I've made the comparison before about how we wake up and check our phones for notifications, but the people in Naruto wake up and make sure their kunai are sharp enough so that they don't die when they leave their village. In this time period, you'd be afraid to just go to sleep anyway. The life expectancy for shinobi and citizens alike was both 30 years old, meaning it didn't matter
low.
if you were in the fighting or not, you could be caught as just collateral damage, like you live in Gotham City or something. What kept this average life expectancy so low was the deaths of many children, like Madara and Hashirama were at this time. Madara is one of 5 children, and throughout his life, all of his brothers died. We don't actually know the names of a lot of them. We only know Izuna, that's the one that Tobirama had killed. This is likely what caused Madara to want to find a way to stop the fighting between all of the people at this time. He's already lost 3 brothers and he's only got 1 left now. I obviously don't think his plan was the infinite Tsukuyomi at this point. He doesn't have the Sharingan to redo Uchiha Stone Tablet or anything. So he actually comes up with his own way, and he actually gives that way for all the fighting to stop. He says, if there were to be a way where neither side had to die, it'd be where both sides revealed their bellies, hid nothing from each other, poured each other drinks, and drank together like brothers. This is extremely mature thinking for a child, but war would make such maturity happen faster. Madara also comments that he thinks this is impossible since one can't really look deep into someone's belly down to their guts, so one or both might actually be seething inside. But he wants this to be possible. He wants there to be a way that this can happen in the future. This to me could possibly show a great deal of empathy, especially for someone in such a war-torn and bloody period. Madara is essentially fighting back and not becoming a product of his environment. I also think a little earlier in this interaction, Madara was showing empathy to a guy he'd met only once. He sees Hashirama sitting by the river, approaches him, and when Hashirama is sad, Madara tells him to talk and that he'll listen. He sort of forces Hashirama to speak in a kind of childish way, but I mean, regardless of the maturity I mentioned for him earlier, he is still a kid after all. But when Hashirama tells Madara that his brother died, Madara's facial expression changes a lot, and he's speechless for the first time since we were introduced to him. He's also got sort of a delayed reaction. It's probably a trigger for him considering at this point he's lost 3 brothers. The panel where his face shifts, there is an ellipsis leading into an exclamation point, showing that it kind of stunned him a little. For this next bit, I'd like to take a look at something that's sort of played up as a joke when Madara is younger, and that's his fear of someone sneaking up on him and how weird he gets when someone is behind him. This is likely due to the time period he's currently living in and his current lack of ability.
Makes sense.
Madara is afraid of being stabbed in the back. Given his reaction to it, I theorized that one of his brothers was killed in this way, or maybe he suffered a major wound for it in the past, but neither of them are hinted at in the original story. I did a video on how to kill Madara where I went a little bit more in depth on this, so you can go check that out if you want to. But for now, let's talk about the guilt Madara feels for not being able to protect his siblings. He actually blames this on his lack of Sharingan. He says that his eyesight isn't actually all that, or else his siblings wouldn't be dead right now. This leads him into saying that he'll protect his brother no matter what, the only brother that he has left at this point. But Madara doesn't mention his dad in that. Given him and Hashirama a similar situation, I'd probably guess that Madara didn't care much for his dad, just like Hashirama didn't care much for his dad, especially since his dad and Hashirama's dad were so intent on keeping the fighting that they were trying to stop going on and keeping the war alive, essentially. Madara awakening the Sharingan is the next really important step for him. It's narrated to us by Hashirama what this is supposed to mean. He decided to completely erase Hashirama from his life. Madara also falls into being a product of his environment here, like I mentioned he was trying to fight against earlier. He still loves his brother obviously, but he's no longer as optimistic about saving the world. He'll protect his brother through fighting and putting down the Senju clan, so that's really all we get about Kid Madara that's relevant to the discussion. I don't think he's a narcissist at this point for sure. I don't think he's even emotionally mature enough to develop something like that, despite how mature he may seem for his age. I'm going to kind of summarize Madara here, but Madara and Hashirama fight all the time from this point on, until one day Izuna is cut down by Tobirama. Madara is offered peace once again by Hashirama, but refuses and runs away. At this point, I think it's probably already too late for Madara. One of the things I appreciate about Naruto and Kishimoto's writing is his ability to tell a story about conflict, but through that same conflict as well. At this point, Madara is already the ultimate product of the Warring States period. He's a strong guy who just can't stop fighting because it's all he's known all his life, and as soon as things get a little rocky again after peace is established, he tries to start the fighting again, but his clan won't follow him this time. So now he's completely alone. No friend, no clan, no brother. He has no one but himself at this point. For this next little tidbit, I want to mention that the only time we learn what I'm about to say is through Obito's retelling of events to Sasuke. Not Madara's own mouth, and not Hashirama's either. And that's the fact that Madara tried to advocate for an Uchiha Hokage and the entire clan turned their backs on him. The way Obito tells it, the Uchiha proposed a ceasefire and Madara was opposed to it completely, but then the rest of the clan started to want to do it, and as their leader, he decided to follow their wishes. But as Hashirama tells us, he and Madara fought one day, and at the end of that day, Madara said the only way for there to be peace was for Hashirama to die, and Hashirama was gonna have to do it, blah 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 blah. So there is one of two things going on here, and for the sake of keeping on pace, we'll ignore the possibility that Kishimoto decided to change his mind later on. Possibility number one is that Madara had told Obito a lie about the events of the past. This wouldn't be unlike him as he manipulated Obito almost his entire life. Possibility number two is that Obito was told a correct account of events and manipulated the story to make Sasuke feel bad for him. I find the second possibility to be less likely though, since Obito as Madara also admits to making decisions that would lead him to conflict with Hashirama, and also admits to never wanting to end the war and their mutual hatred, etc, etc, etc. You get the point. I think it's much more likely Madara just lied to Obito. I'll get back to Madara manipulating Obito in a bit, but for now, I'd like to take a look at Madara's overall plan and true dream, because
It's not a bad theory.
it's kind of on a grand scale. Madara's end goal is to have everyone on Earth trapped inside the infinite Tsukuyomi, and for him to lead that world with his chakra that he views as the strongest. In other words, Madara is the only person who gets a say in what goes down. I think this is incredibly narcissistic. Madara views himself as the savior, and although I'm sure he loves violence, I'm sure he'd be willing to not fight anyone if they just handed over all their Biju and went under the infinite Tsukuyomi quietly. A lot of people will try to twist this as Madara being selfless, but how is Madara being selfless when he wants to become the strongest person to force his will onto the people that don't want what he's offering? It's also really hard to believe that Madara is just this selfless saint who only wants to help the world when he constantly says things like how he hates this world and rejects it and wants to create a new world. You have people like Hashirama who try to vouch for his character, saying things like Madara is a fundamentally kind man and blah blah blah, but he manipulated multiple kids and set at least one up to die. I think it's very true that on a surface level, everyone should be able to, at the very least, understand Madara's end goal to save everyone, because they'll be in a dream that no one can distinguish from reality. I'm sure that a lot of people in the real world would probably want to interact with a world like that. If Madara only had this idea, it would be fine. It's the way he goes about trying to execute the idea, what has to be done for it, and the things he does in pursuit of the goal. This next part is going to be another part of, oh, Obito said it, but did he get it from Madara, blah blah blah, like I went over earlier.
Alright, so I definitely want to chime in on this, and I actually disagree with the moral evaluation Six is making here, and here's why. Madara, right, as Six has illustrated, was shaped by his environment, certainly. That I do agree with. He was certainly shaped by his environment, his traumatic experiences, the deaths that he observed and witnessed, specifically his own brothers. These experiences and events would shape his character and shape his ideology, right? His pseudo-ostracization from the Uchiha clan would further reinforce his ideology, right? He wanted to find a way to end the cycle of hatred, right? This very famous cycle of hatred that is very prevalent in Naruto, right? And it lasted for generations, right? The first Great Ninja War, the second, the third, the fourth. These wars would illustrate the cycle of hatred and the cyclical nature of it in Naruto, right? So Madara wanted to end that, and he formulated the Eye of the Moon plan, right? AKA the Infinite Tsukuyomi. To him, that was the only outcome to achieve true peace, right? He gives this very famous speech to Obito after saving him from being smashed by that boulder, right? He says that putting in any effort into life is futile, right? Life is just filled with pain and suffering. So because of that, he came to this epiphany that the only way to end the cycle of hatred is to remove the free will of the imperfect being known as a shinobi. Madara was aware that all shinobi are imperfect, and that conflict will always prevail in an imperfect world. Right? And to him, the only way to achieve true peace is to end the free will that any shinobi may have. And to him, that was the morally righteous thing to do. Everything he had to do to lead up to the end of the war arc, in his eyes, was just the means to the end. Was it the best means to the end? No. Was manipulating children and being willing to slaughter hundreds to thousands of shinobi the best way to achieve his goals? No. But to him, it was the outcome that would justify his actions. So we got to keep in mind that his environment shaped his ideology and his character. Right? And I don't think that Madara is a narcissist, a blatant one, with this goal in mind. A narcissist doesn't care about others. A narcissist doesn't care whatsoever about other people. Is Madara the perfect individual? Absolutely not. But he's certainly morally gray. His convictions had good intentions behind them. I truly believe that. And I truly believe that he himself thought of himself as a morally righteous person. I think that he wanted the best for the ninja world. Now, do I think his ideology was the correct one? No. In my opinion, I think Naruto's and Hashirama's was the correct one. I think that was Kishimoto's conclusion as well, which is why Naruto won in the end. Right? Naruto won in the end. He got his way. He beat Sasuke, he beat Madara, he beat Kaguya, and he allowed free will to triumph at the end of the war arc. Morality is very gray, and Kishimoto did a brilliant job establishing this battle of moral high ground, this class of ideology, if you will, between Madara's ideology and Naruto's ideology. These ideologies would clash for generations, right? Hashirama and Madara, Indra and Ashura, Naruto and Sasuke. These ideologies would clash for a long time. And I think Madara, deep down, had good intentions. Was he a radical fundamentalist when it came to his ideology? Certainly. He wasn't willing to be molded. At the beginning of his childhood, in his early years, he was more malleable. And certain things and certain events could have shifted his ideology and the radical fundamentalist nature of it. If the Uchiha clan would have backed him up, who knows? Maybe he never would have became this radical fundamentalist authoritarian. It might have never happened. He might have been more kind-hearted, more of a president-like figure rather than an authoritarian. Right, but we got what we got, and he went through the experiences that he went through. And because of that, he became this radical fundamentalist as far as his ideology is concerned. I don't think he's a narcissist because of that. I just think that he's a product of his environment. And now, am I trying to justify his actions? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Madara is more than competent enough to understand the suffering that he did cause to get to the point that he wanted to get to. He's certainly not perfect, and he certainly has selfish tendencies. He's certainly self-absorbed, and he certainly has a God complex. However, narcissism and a God complex are not mutually inclusive. You can have a God complex and not necessarily be a blatant narcissist. A blatant narcissist doesn't care about anybody else. Anybody else. If he was a blatant narcissist, what he would most likely do is put himself in the infinite tsukuyomi and say, to hell with everybody else. I don't care a shit about anybody. I don't care about anybody else. I'm gone. That's what a narcissist would do. That's my thoughts so far. Let's continue on.
But Obito tells Konan that the only reason Madara engaged in battle with Hashirama was to obtain his powers. In other words, he planned ahead and never expected to win. There are things to support this and things that kind of don't. My interpretation of it would be the fact that Madara wanted to win but also had a backup plan in case he lost. I think this fits the most with Madara's character and the things he did leading up to the fight, as well as the things that happened after the battle, like making the Nine Tails his ally. But I guess ally in this sense is a stretch of the word, considering Madara sort of just forced the guy to bend to his will. You get what I mean. And he also did invoke the time spell on Izanagi so that he could revive in case he was killed. I'm more or less getting at the idea that Madara is not a kind man. He's extremely selfish and he's extremely cruel. I think it's important to remember that Madara is rejecting the world because of the people in it and how it's treated him, which is why his goal isn't to blow up the planet or something like that. He's not mad at the physical earth. I only say this in case anyone wants to try to give Madara an out by trying to misinterpret his words as not meaning the people but the world itself. I think it's fairly obvious, and I'm sure most of the honest thinking people watching this video thought the same way, but unfortunately, that's not all of us. Anyway, I think I've more or less made my point by now. Even if you think Madara's end goal is noble, the method to obtain those goals is not noble. It's not kind, and it's not worthy of any praise. He's a manipulative man who wanted to force his will onto the people around him.
That's true.
And while I do sympathize with the fact that Madara was sort of broken and created by the world around him, as I was going over it, there was a point in his life where he actually wanted to stop this cycle, and it was no longer the case come time we met him in chapter 560 when he's introduced in the war arc. That all sort of justifies Madara not being kind, but that doesn't make him a narcissist like the title of the video is trying to answer. I think Madara thinking that it should be him who is the savior and he who should have the strongest chakra is fairly narcissistic though. An excessive self-interest in himself or admiration for it. To him, he's saving the world, but not to anyone else. This is where I kind of want to end/wrap up the video. I think a lot of what I could say here on out would just be pointless observation. I do, however, think what I was saying may have gotten lost over the course of the video, so I'll make my conclusion clear as water for anyone listening. I think for the majority of his childhood and early adult life, Madara was a fairly selfless person, and over time he grew more powerful and he grew more lonely. I think at that point is when he became a narcissist, as he had no one anymore, and over 60 years to sit alone and just think, likely convincing himself that he was the savior as he thought out the rest of his plan for the infinite Tsukuyomi. He just as easily could have handed the job off to Obito and had him become the savior after he died permanently, never meant to revive him, but instead Madara decided he should be the one to save everyone and possess the most powerful chakra and cast the infinite Tsukuyomi. So do I think Madara is a narcissist? Yeah, probably. Or at the very least, he's very self-centered. Now, this kind of puts me in a weird spot because I defined two different words at the beginning of the video. One of them was narcissist and the other was narcissism. I think naturally everyone would think a narcissist shows traits of narcissism, but that doesn't appear to be the case, at least not within the definitions on Oxford languages. Madara does lack the need for admiration that one of the definitions describes, and as far as the psychoanalysis definition I outlined, I couldn't really find any of those traits in Madara, at least not through my reread of the story while researching this video. The closest thing I could find for Madara looking for admiration was just him wanting people to follow him when doing the infinite Tsukuyomi plan, but I think that hardly counts as wanting or needing admiration. Anyway, that's pretty much all for the video. If you like the video,
is always 6.
Please leave a like on it, subscribe to the channel, and other than that, have a nice day.
All right, there you guys have it, folks. I definitely want to get my thoughts on that. So, what we can all agree on is that Madara is not the most pure-hearted individual. Madara is not the most noble individual, and Madara certainly isn't the most morally righteous individual. Right? But morality is extremely ambiguous and arbitrary once you really narrow down the extreme good and the extreme bad, right? In our own modern Western civilization, we sort of have this 10 Commandment templated moral compass, right? Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie, right? These sort of universal presupposed laws are the laws that most individuals in modern Western civilization follow. But what we should remember is that the Naruto verse is different from our own modern Western civilization, right? War is common. Violence is common to even children in the Naruto verse. Moral compasses will vary from our own. Obviously, the best of the best, such as Naruto, believe in free will, believe in a sort of democracy, or pseudo-democracy, if you will, and they believe in meritocracy, right? Very similar to most of Western civilization. But things such as death, such as violence, are normal to shinobi. It is a normal occurrence to even a child. They are desensitized to it, so it doesn't hold as much significance to them. The emotional impact isn't as high as someone like a modern day child seeing brutal violence being enacted upon before their very eyes. That's not the case for shinobi. Obviously, they grow around this. They grow, especially in Madara's era during the Warring States period. The Senju and the Uchiha constantly were in battle. Madara must have been seeing death from a very, very, very young age. So most individuals saw death as something as common as going to the grocery store for us. It's something very, very common. So the moral significance of death probably didn't weigh as heavy as it would on us in modern Western civilization. So because of that, I think Madara is not as cruel as he might be portrayed, such as in this video. Do I think he's a morally righteous, amazing, and kind person? No, he's not. He's certainly morally gray, and the methods that he tried to enact to try and become the savior of the world certainly was not noble. Certainly not. However, the way he looked at this whole situation is he saw himself as the parent that the world needed. Right? He saw the world as his child, right? The shinobi in the world as his child, and he saw himself as the parent that had to do what had to be done. That's probably how he saw himself in this whole situation. So when he was fighting the Alliance in the war arc, he saw himself as the disciplinary. He saw himself as the father figure, or more specifically, the God figure that had to do what had to be done. Right? To him, the means justified the ends. Right? So to him, the death, the violence that he was enacting upon the shinobi world was necessary to complete to what he thought was a nobly righteous goal to end the cycle of hatred. To him, the sacrifice was justified by the infinite tsukuyomi. Right? So from an outside perspective, I could see us in modern Western civilization calling him cruel, and even individuals within the shinobi world calling him cruel. I agree that some of his methods were cruel, but then again, we got to analyze the differences between our modern Western civilization and his era, specifically the Warring States era, which was even more cruel than the era that we witnessed during Naruto's generation. His generation and his era was worse. War was prevalent, constant, and it seemed like it was never going to end to kids in that era, truly. But regardless, Madara certainly displays narcissistic tendencies. He sees his own perspective and ideology as the superior ideology. He certainly has a god complex, but I don't deem him as a narcissist. I don't. I do deem him, however, as having some arbitrary level of narcissism in him, but is it enough to diagnose him as a blatant narcissist? No. I don't. I don't think it's enough to deem him as such. Someone like Part 1 Gaara, easily a blatant narcissist. Someone like Hidan, easily a blatant narcissist. Easily. It's not even close. Those individuals don't care about anybody. They don't care what happens to the world. They don't even care about the cycle of hatred. That's not even on their mind. There is no selfless attribute to them whatsoever. Part 1 Gaara only cared about feeling alive and becoming more powerful, and he only cared about this hypothetical Joshin and pleasing him. And honestly, I think that was just a symbolic representation of his own will, to be honest with you. And his cult, right? The Joshin cult. That was just the Joshin figure, to me, honestly, is just a justification for their maniacal and sinister acts within that cult. Honestly, I think that cult is extremely self-absorbed, and the cult itself is extremely narcissistic, slaughtering individuals for the thrill. That's the true premise underneath the justification of Joshin. That's my opinion on that. But yeah, folks, that's my thoughts on the video. Very well done. Morality is always a very interesting topic to discuss. I've planned on making my own videos, and specifically on Madara himself as well, and his ideology. And I will bring those soon. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you think Madara was a narcissist? Do you think he wasn't? Do you think he's in the middle? Do you agree with me? Do you agree with Six? Whatever your thoughts might be, make sure to leave them down in the comment section below. But it's going to wrap it up, and I'll catch you in the next one. This is Jay the Great signing out. Peace.